Howdy. Howdy. Let's try that again. Howdy. Howdy. Good work. Second time was the charm there. I'm Max Angerholzer. I'm honored to be the CEO of the George and Barbara Bush Foundation and very excited for you all to be here this evening for a very special event and program in honor of the 25th anniversary of the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum. We have two all-stars from Bush World with us tonight. We have the great Jean Becker. I know y'all had a chance to see her book out there. Hopefully you bought a few copies. If you need more, they're going to be out there afterwards or in the museum store whenever you go over there. Jean Becker is a journalist. She matriculated at the University of Missouri. She worked at USA Today, and during the 1988 campaign, she got to know soon-to-be President and First Lady George and Barbara Bush covering that campaign. She then worked for the First Lady in the White House. And then later, when President Bush returned to Houston after his term in office, she became Chief of Staff to President Bush for the rest of his life. And so Jean is an extraordinary person to talk about the legacy of President and Mrs. Bush, but also to talk about the legacy of this incredible library and museum. We'll also be joined by the great Warren Finch, who has been director of this library and museum since Christmas Day of 2004. He started here at the beginning of 1993, right, Mary? It was the beginning of 93. So he's almost had 30 years with us. And as many of you have heard, Warren's going to be stepping down from the directorship, but he's trying really hard, and I think we're going to be able to pull it off. He wants to be a docent at the museum, so he's going to have to work his way up. You think I'm kidding? He's going to be a docent there. So very excited about that program. But before we get to the main attraction, just a couple of quick thank yous and acknowledgments. First of all, I want to welcome and thank Dean Mark Welsh, who is Dean of the Bush School. Mark. Warren and I are very fortunate to work with Mark and his team every day and to share the Bush Presidential Library Center with the Bush School and with the library. It's an extraordinary partnership. And I think it exemplifies the amazing relationship that we have with Texas A&M University. You know, President Bush picked Texas A&M for his presidential library because they had the same core values as Aggie Land in terms of selfless service and putting others before yourself. And so when I think of President and Mrs. Bush, I think of selfless service. And when I think of Texas A&M, I certainly think of that. We have amazing support from Chancellor Sharp, who was just with us a few minutes ago, President Banks, and of course, Chairman of the Board, Tim Leach, who's going to be joining us a little bit later. So really honored to be part of Aggie Land. And I don't think there's any question that the relationship that we have here with Texas A&M University is stronger than any relationship that a presidential library and foundation has, and we do not take that for granted. I want to thank a couple of our Aggie friends that are here today. First of all, Norman Garza, who is Vice President of Government Relations. Norman, thanks for all you do. And then, of course, Tyson Vocal, who is head of the Texas A&M Foundation. Tyson. And that's a really big deal, but what's an even bigger deal is he's a Bush School grad. So well done, Tyson. Bruce Hamilton, who is the CEO of the Association of the Corps of Cadets. Bruce, thank you for your service. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the city of College Station. We are so proud to be part of College Station. We're so proud to be here within the city limits of College Station. I think that's one of the things that makes the Bush Presidential Center so special. We've had incredible support from Mayor Mooney and from members of the City Council who are here. So Mayor Mooney, are you here with us? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Brian Woods, the city manager, has been incredibly supportive as well. Brian? And I just have to say, and I think we have to thank the mayor and the city council for this, but if y'all haven't noticed, if you look at the new seal of the city of College Station, it is the front of the 4141 locomotive. And if anything says partnership, that does. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And then finally, before Jean yanks me off stage, I just want to thank a few of our friends at the George and Barbara Bush Foundation. First of all, our staff who make this event and every event possible, especially Sarah Farrell and Meredith Thomason, who are on our event staff. So thank them for all of their help. We have a number of members of our advisory council who are in town for a meeting, and I'm not going to remember all of your names, so I'm going to do something which I apologize for. But if you're on the advisory council, will you please stand up real quick and acknowledge the crowd? Thank you. So the advisory council is a group that goes back to the White House, and this was a group that was very special to President and Mrs. Bush, and they provide incredible advice and support to everything we do here at the Bush Presidential Center. You can also tell that after all these years, they're still really close because they're all sitting together. There were other seats, but you're all there together. And then some additional leaders from the foundation. First of all, a member of our board of directors, Mr. Neil Bush. Neil, thank you for everything you do. Neil's sort of the hardest working guy in Bush world because he also chairs the advisory board at the Bush School. He's chair of the Points of Light Foundation. He's chair of the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation. So your service is amazing, and I know your parents are very proud of all that you have done. Thank you. One of my absolute favorite people who has been an amazing friend to me since I came to College Station and is really much, I think, probably the most famous Aggie around and the former CEO of this foundation, Fred McClure. Fred, can you wave? Jim Saccone, who's also on our board of directors. Jim. And Jim's especially important to the anniversary tonight because when he worked in the White House for President Bush, he helped to work out the amazing partnership here. And so we would not be here today if it wasn't for Jim's hard work. So Jim, thank you for that. James Davison, who's on our board of trustees. James, thank you for all you do for the foundation. And then finally, I didn't mean to leave him for last, but he is also one of my very favorite people, former chair of the Board of Regents, John White. John. So thank you all for indulging me in those thank yous. Chairman Leach, thank you again for all the amazing things you and Texas A&M do for the Bush Presidential Center. And without further ado, Jean and Warren.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Am I on? Warren and I are excited to be here. We do have bad news for Max. You owe us 15 minutes. So, I know without a doubt that no one here won the Powerball last week because it's some person in California. I still have hope as my little brother, the Catholic priest, but he hasn't come forward yet. I'm going to offer $1 million to anyone who can guess what picture we're going to start with tonight. And if you can't, you're not playing.
Okay.
No, Stephanie, you can't play. No staff can play. $1 million, people, right here. Okay, Sarah, this is where we started. What most of you here may not know, this used to be a pig farm. This was, 30 years ago, we started with a pig farm here. And this is where A&M chose to put the library. This is what it looked like 30 years ago. I just want to assure everyone the pigs were found a happy home. But I want Warren, what, they were not found a happy home? Don't tell, what?
No.
Well, okay.
She doesn't know the story.
Apparently the first row ate pork chops later that. So I'm actually going to put my journalist hat on. Buckle up, buddy.
Thank you.
So Warren, a bowling alley?
Well,
seriously, do you want to defend the bowling alley? And just talk to us about the beginning of the library.
So I got here January 2nd, 1993, and it wasn't just a bowling alley. It was a bowling alley and a Chinese restaurant. So I got here in, like I said, January 93, and the building was demoed. So the great thing about a bowling alley is that there's no columns in the alley. So we were able to put shelving up without any without any columns, and there was a Chinese restaurant. And
Which made news recently.
It actually didn't have a screen door. You couldn't just walk in. There was security there, and it was pretty secure. And there was a skiff in that building too. They tore that building down about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I'm not sure how they got rid of the skiff because the thing had reinforced concrete bars like every 6 inches, and one of these things where, kind of like Get Smart, it had a combination lock, and you went through a door, and then you had to put a key into another door, and then you had to spin a dial on a combination, and you had like 60 seconds to get the combination right. And then you open the door, and on the inside of the door was a keypad, and you had to put in a 6-digit key number. And you had to do all this within, I think, about a minute or a minute and a half, or the alarm system went off. So it was pretty secure. But anyway, all the materials were flown out of Washington, D.C. on C-5A cargo planes, and then trucked, put onto tractor-trailer trucks, and sent to College Station. And in the early morning hours, in every small town in Texas we went through, there was a sheriff in the middle of the street at the one traffic light directing traffic. And we had, so the shelving, I was in charge of putting all the shelving in the building. So we had all the shelving arranged, and then we sent that shelving plan back to DC. And so every box had a location on a shelf. So there was row 1, 7, top shelf. 1, first spot. And
Are you going to go through every box like that?
No.
I'm just curious. Okay, go ahead.
So we picked up a busload of troops from Fort Hood. Most of them had been in Desert Storm, and brought them to College Station. And we thought it would take all day long to shelve all the boxes. So my 2 favorites were Rosenbaum and Patia, 2 soldiers from Fort Hood that could use a word in the English vocabulary that sounds like fire truck. And they could use it as a noun, a verb, an adjective, an adverb, sometimes as a conjunction, a modifier, and an explanation. And they would put this word together in a sentence, and by the way they were saying it, you could actually understand what they were talking about. So we had these things called streamliners, which held about 30 boxes. It's like a flatbed on steroids. And these kids had stopwatches, and they would load up these streamliners, these kids in pairs, and then their lieutenant would hit the stopwatch, and they would run and start putting the boxes on the shelf. So this started about 6 a.m. in the morning. We thought it would take all day long. By 11:30, they were done. I mean,
so about the same length of time it's taking you to tell this story.
Exactly.
Wait, what? Wait, did everybody hear that? Did I say that out loud?
No, your mic was hot. It wasn't supposed to be, but it was hot. Anyway, there were amazing kids, just amazing kids, and we somehow smuggled. We gave them pizza, which they could have. They weren't supposed to have beer, but we somehow smuggled beer on the bus and sent them back to Fort Hood, and they were fantastic. That was on the 15th of January, and then we repeated this process again on, I believe, the 21st, the day after the administration.
We don't need to repeat it.
No.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to tell us the history of how President Bush decided to put the library here. But here's my advice, because I love you. So I used to be a reporter for
Reader's
USA
Digest
Today. No, you're going to tell the USA Today version, not the New York Times version. And if you screw it up, Jim Saccone will get up here and beat you up because he knows the story. So tell us. I was a little concerned when Warren and I were trying to decide what photos to show. He has memos. You're an archivist. You're such an archivist.
I'm sorry,
So
I can't help it.
Is it time to put the memos up?
Yeah.
Put up the memos. So you have 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
So when President Bush was elected, before he was president of the United States, he had a group of energy people. One of them was Michael Halbudi. Michael Halbudi's got a building here named after him at Texas A&M. And because Michael Halbudi documented everything, there's a book about this thick with all the memos. So he goes to President Bush and he says, President Bush, have you thought about putting your presidential library at Texas A&M? And President-elect Bush goes, well, Michael, it's too early. I'm not even president yet. He says, well, how about I go and talk to the people at Texas A&M and ask them. So Michael Halbudi comes back to Texas A&M and they form a committee. Chancellor's on it, a bunch of people in the community, a lot of people at the university. And they decided, this is a great idea. So they invite President Bush to come to the May commencement. He's going to be the commencement speaker right after he's become president of the United States. They take him to the Memorial Student Center.
Is that the picture we have?
Yeah.
Sarah, we can get rid of the memo, which is fascinating.
The next one.
But
do the next one.
let's do the pic. Let's.
No, let's do this one first.
That's more boxes, I think.
No. So they take him over to the Memorial Student Center, and Michael Halbudi is there. And you have to realize that the Reagan Library was supposed to go to Stanford, but the Stanford faculty rejected it. So President Bush very much wanted to be somewhere he would be loved. So Michael Halbudi, it's Texas A&M, it's an engineering school, so they have a model of what the library is going to look like built. And he looks at it and, well, that's nice. They take him by the site. And then Michael Halbudi pulls out of his pocket. He says, well, I have the box returns for Rice, Houston, and Texas A&M. And as you can
he
see,
was smart.
as you can see, the students at Texas A&M voted for President Bush. I can't see well, but I think that's something like 78%? 79 to 21. And Michael Halbudi says to President Bush, does that make a difference? And President Bush says, well, Michael, I think it does. And there it is.
There it is. There it is. He felt very welcomed here all the time.
He did indeed.
So the decision's made to put the library here, and they start building the library. I think we have a great photo. I love this photo. Under construction. So right before Don Wilson, who was the first head of the foundation and who helped build the library, Don was Archivist of the United States. The Bushes would come up and walk through as it being built. They were curious about it. I think President Bush came the day they moved the pigs. You know, he was very into this. But anyway, Don let me know that he had one chance to walk through it one last time to make changes, and then it was done, because this was just, I don't know, what do you think, 4 months for it opened, 6 months for it opened?
Probably so, yeah.
So I came up with President Bush. Mrs. Bush must have been out of town. And we walked through, and he had two suggestions. He said that the color red that was being used in the China part of the exhibit was the wrong color red.
Correct.
I remember Don Wilson sort of rolled his eyes. And then some lovely woman, I hope she's not here, had donated her entire collection of ceramic and crystal elephants to the library. And President Bush didn't like the elephants. He thought they took up too much room.
They're in
Those
there.
were the, are they still in there?
Not all of them, not as
Oh,
many as there
gosh.
were. They're
less. Those are only two things he told Don Wilson and the builders. So we get back in the car, and he looks at me and he says, I have a huge problem with the library. And I said, really? He says, there's a big problem, Jean. And I said, well, you were supposed to tell Don Wilson that. And he says, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. So I want you to tell him. I'm like,
Of course.
of course. And I said, well, okay, what's your problem? It's too much about me.
Yeah.
Is that not him? It's too much about me. So I'm sitting there thinking how I can do this diplomatically. And I said, sir, we were still sitting in front of the library and the name was already up was already etched in the stone. I said, sir, it is the George Bush Library. It is supposed to be about you. But it was so him.
Yeah.
He said, I want it to be about my team.
Yeah.
He said, and he started talking about people like Secretary Baker and Brent Scowcroft and Bob Mosbacher. He says, it needs to be more about my team. And so it was just so him. And you told me something today that I didn't know.
So
let me
go
just
ahead.
quick, no, just quickly.
No, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
So I called Don, and Don loved it. And so they just put up more pictures. But tell me what you told. Tell them what you told me today.
One of the issues, it was a great library, the first rendition, but it wasn't enough about George Bush, because there was so much about the team, and that's great. But people wanted to see the George Bush Library. So for the 10th anniversary, we redid the whole thing, and President Bush came in and he said, my mother wouldn't like this place. And I said, why? It's about me. And I was like, because, you know, he told this story his entire life about coming home from a soccer match and telling his mother he'd scored 3 goals. And his mother said to him, George, no one loves a braggadocio. How'd the team do? It's all about the team, not about the eye, George. And so he told that story his entire life. I'm sure you heard it many times.
So him thinking it was too much about him.
He was embarrassed because it was too much George Bush.
So first of all, I just want to point out I have a technical issue, and those of you in front may notice that my radio is sticking through my sweater, and I'm trying to fix it. I give up. So I just want you to know I'm aware. Stephanie is embarrassed. It's sticking up. It is what it is. Get over it. Okay. So we're going to fast forward to dedication, and Ann Brock is here. I talked Ann Brock, who was Mrs. Bush's scheduler at the White House. I'm not sure how I did this. I think we were drinking, but I convinced her to move to Texas to be in charge of dedication, and she did. She did an amazing job. And some members, I know Laura Pears is here, was on staff at that time. Library dedication was my first hint of many things to come, like the commissioning of the aircraft carrier. President Bush loved to throw a party. And we just invited everybody, thinking a few people would come up, would come. You know, people are busy. We knew all the presidents would come, because all the presidents do 2 things. They do library dedications and they did funerals. So all the presidents came. President Reagan could not come. He already had Alzheimer's. There's a picture from dedication. But I went through the RSVPs and took some notes. We had 15 sitting governors who came. We didn't see that coming. John Major, Lech Walesa, Brian Mulrooney, and a couple of other head of state, like Sir John Swan, whatever his name was. This is my favorite. Kevin Costner came. I know. I didn't get to see him. And about 20,000 other people. He just was having the time of his life. So it's dedication day. We brought the train up, and he was so excited. And he had a breakfast with the governors. I may be getting some of this wrong, Ann, but we had a little meal for everybody. And in the 11th hour, of course, the President of the United States is coming. That would be William Jefferson Clinton. And in the 11th hour, President Bush turns to the governor of Texas and says, George, the governor of Texas was George W. Bush. He says, George, the Air Force One had landed in Houston. It could not land here. The runway wasn't big enough. And he brought Marine One up, the Marine One that I think will be in the library one day. And President Bush turned to the governor of Texas and said, George, we need to go to the airport and meet the president. You're the governor. And they get in the car and leave. They leave us there. And with all these VIPs, and first of all, the Secret Service were like, you're doing what? Because all the roads are closed. And President Bush, I remember him saying, I know all the people, I know all the agents. And we're like, oh my God. So off they go. So my job was to greet President Carter. We started, Don Wilson and I and a couple other people, we divided up the presidents to go greet them because President Bush had run off. And President Carter, I love President Carter, but he was a little grumpy. I said, President Carter, I introduced myself, and I said, President Bush has taken the governor of Texas, Governor Bush, to the airport to greet the President of the United States. And President Carter said, I guess when you're out, you're out.
Yeah, well, that's true enough.
And I almost said, I think, Sarah, can you show the next picture that I pulled that is just such an interesting photo? This was way before.
Well, first of all,
Okay.
Look how beautiful and sunny it is.
Yes.
The day before was absolutely
Awful.
miserable.
Yeah.
And so that morning we were all worried, and then it's President Bush weather.
The sun came out and it was gorgeous.
I had
And
to throw that in.
I'm glad you said that. That's a really good point. So Mary Finch sent me a gazillion photos. Isn't this, Mary sent me 100 photos to go through. She didn't send me any memos, but she sent me a lot of photos to go through to show you all tonight. This photo was taken about, I can do the math, this was 8 years before The Odd Couple. And it's just interesting. This is the day of library dedication. I just love the looks on their faces. And I'm not sure why I'm even sharing this with you all, but it's just sort of fun, isn't it? What do we think they're talking about?
Yeah.
No, don't say. What do you think?
I should have beat you. You can see Bill Clinton's going, probably right.
I think that's good. I think that's exactly what they're talking about.
See that? You can see.
Yeah, look, and I think I think you're right. I think President Bush is saying to him, "You must be joking. You're the one who beat me." And
Look at that
anyway,
look on Clinton's face.
And within 8 years, they'd be best friends,
Yeah.
and had the most wonderful friendship maybe in the history of our country. The Odd Couple. So. Dedication was just a lot of fun. It was enormous. We didn't expect all these people to come, and he was just thrilled. And so the library is open, and I think a lot of people here, certainly the archivists, a lot of people are thinking, okay, this is President Bush's time in history. We're going to tell the world his life story. There's this amazing museum. We have the archivists who are processing all his papers. We're ready for this. And I think I even said to him, sir, this is the beginning of your legacy. You don't ever use the L word with George Herbert Walker Bush. He hated the L word. He hated the legacy word. And then I realized for President Bush, this was his new playground. The library was all about a place for him to come and hang out and invite friends. And I think why don't we start? You have some wonderful stories about the Bushes, and Sarah has some photos to share with us.
So I actually think President Bush, if Mrs. Bush would have let him, would have moved here. He loved this place. But the first thing you knew they were here, you'd see one of the dogs out by the horses, or they'd be walking the dogs early in the morning. And then he would pop in, and he would greet students, visitors. A couple of my favorite stories. Look, he's.
You just pop in. I love that picture.
And I would do a tour with him. We'd have like Arnold Schwarzenegger or someone would be here, and I'd start doing the tour, and then President Bush would take the tour over. Like this. I started.
This would be a good example.
See the handsome guy in the red tie?
Sarah, let's just stay on Arnold for a while because he's sort of cute. But let's just stay on him.
This is one of those situations where I started giving the tour. But President Bush would show up, and people would be like, "He's here." Yes, he's here. And he was great with kids. There was this one time he was in a wheelchair, and there was a school group, and the school group had a child that was in a wheelchair. And President Bush came in and moved his wheelchair over to the kid with the wheelchair, and they got their picture taken, and President Bush talked to him. I just thought it was just absolutely wonderful. Just a wonderful moment. Kind of like him shaving his head.
Shaving his head. Yeah, that's another whole story, but I wish we had a picture of that. Anyway, he loved just surprising. He would run around campus, and he would go to baseball practice, to football practice. He would come home and be gone for hours. He'd been all over campus. But it also was he loved to invite his friends here.
Oh, yes.
The greatest gift we probably gave A&M while he was just let's hold right there. While he was alive, I could show you 20 photos like this. So we just had Arnold Schwarzenegger. Here he is with Mikhail Gorbachev crossing the bridge, which now takes you to the gravesite. Sarah, let's see the next one.
He's probably taking him out there. This is where I'm going to be buried.
Here, this is Helmut Kohl, and this is where he probably took over the tour. He's giving the tour.
He almost always took over the tour.
Almost always took over the tour.
I felt so inadequate.
I can't remember who else I pulled. You felt that. What's the next one? Ted Kennedy.
Oh, and
that was that people were stunned. And by the way, I didn't pull a picture of her, but he also hosted Nancy Pelosi here. But he gave Ted Kennedy the George Bush Award, Excellence in Public Service, and he came out and basically warned the Aggie students, this is my friend, we're going to give him a warm, eggy welcome. And he looked at them. Neil, you've seen that look before from your dad. We're at Rudder, and he looked at, and they knew that they were going to be in big trouble. But and the crowd just went wild.
But he also gave Ted Kennedy kind of a hard time in a lighthearted way about making fun of his son. And Ted Kennedy at one point got up and tried to sneak off the stage, and but that was
Ted Kennedy tried to sneak off the stage.
In a funny way.
Okay.
You know, they were playing against each other, but he and the entire Kennedy family came to less than the rotunda of the building, I believe.
They did. Like Ethel Kennedy came with him, his sister Eunice came with him, and a whole bunch of people. But we could go on and on. Tony Blair came when he was Prime Minister still Prime Minister of Great Britain. Jiang Zemin came when he was President of China. It was just amazing the people he brought to this campus. But truly, one of his favorite things to do was to host forums.
Yes.
And it was wonderful, but the problem is he would wake up and think, oh, I'm going to invite this group of people to the library. Sarah, I hope the next picture, this would be a great example. You are seeing on stage Tom Selleck to the far left, and I know this is irrelevant to the story, but Tom Selleck did kiss me that day. I don't remember why, but he gave me a little kiss, and no one took a picture.
That's kind of an eclectic group, though, isn't it?
The next person over is an astronaut. I wrote down their names. That is Steve. He was Steve Lindsay, head of the astronauts, who President Bush was friends with. Next over is the Las Vegas casino owner, Steve Wynn, and Diane Sawyer.
What do they have in common?
I will give any of you $1 million if you can tell me what these people have in common. And what I remember about this forum in particular is the great Nancy Newman, who was the events coordinator for years here. She called Laura Pearsby, because Laura was in our office, was the point of contact for all library events. And Nancy, for example, the invitation for tonight, 25th anniversary of the library, Gene Becker and Warren Finch. It made sense. Nancy says, what do I put on the invitation? How do I describe what this is? And I'm wishing I'd had someone pull the invitation. I can't remember what we did. I couldn't help her. But let me just say, Tom Selleck did kiss me that day. So anyway, after that event in particular, because Nancy was so frustrated, I did say, you know what, sir, we need to have themes. The Library Foundation would like theme nights. And so we need to invite people. I mean, again, this is Tom Selleck and Diane Sawyer and Steve Wynn,
I'm not even sure what
casino,
they talked
and
about.
an astronaut. They have nothing. So he says, okay, I have a great idea. My next theme is going to be women who have broken the glass ceiling. And I'm like, yes, I was so proud of him. Sir, that is a perfect theme. Let's see the next picture. That would be Terry Hatcher on the far left of Designing Women.
Yeah, she certainly broke
The
glass
next one
ceiling.
is Harriet Myers, who was George W.'s White House counsel, almost his Supreme Court nominee. Then we have Chris Evert, the tennis player, of course. And the next one is an astronaut. That would be Eileen Collins. So he told me the women he was going to invite. And I said, okay, really? I said, okay. And he said, Jean, they all broke the glass ceiling. And he was right, but these women had nothing in common.
No.
But you know what? And he would be the moderator of these events.
I spent most of my evening with Elaine Collins. She was lovely, just lovely.
She's lovely. And I do remember President Bush was very close to all the astronauts because, of course, NASA is in Houston. He knew all of them. He knew all the Apollo astronauts. The day Columbia blew up, he and Mrs. Bush got in the car and went to NASA. And he walked all through mission control. I really have a hard time not crying talking about it. I went with them. And it meant everything to them. That was a horrible day. And it meant everything to them. There they were. The Bushes just show up to hug them. And so he was big on astronauts were on just about every panel. But, you know, we probably should have had an astronaut panel.
Well,
You know what occurs to me? I was a bad chief of staff.
yeah. There should have been a theme.
We did a gazillion of these panels. He had so much fun. He loved doing them. And he was the moderator. He was a great moderator.
He was a great moderator.
He was a very good moderator. Mainly the Bushes, in addition to the events, this was their second home or their third home. They loved it here. And we just pulled some photos to share with you.
Yeah.
This is the Bushes pretending to be Aggie Wranglers.
You know, they absolutely loved Aggie Wranglers.
I remember I walked in on this. I'm guessing Tom Frechette and Hutton over here were the aides at this time, and they're the ones who could have stopped this. But I remember I walked in on this, and I'm like, what the hell are you all doing? And the Bushes said, oh, we're auditioning to be Wranglers.
Well, look at this.
Is that not the best photo?
And they love the university, love the students. The students are great. But I mean, and both President and Mrs. Bush both had this incredible sense of humor, especially President Bush.
So I pulled this photo because Mrs. Bush, she was such a shutterbug. And in her post-White House life, she loved to take pictures. She would just walk around and take pictures. And here she is. Is that the Wranglers again?
It is.
Taking a picture of them?
Can I tell one quick story?
Yes.
So, thank you. I thought I was going to be the problem. See that look?
What's your retirement date?
No Christmas card for me. So Mrs. Bush, the pictures brings us to mind. Mrs. Bush, for years, kept scrapbooks, and there's 100 and how many of them? 115, and she did them herself. One day, someone asked her if she did them herself. That was not a good question. But she annotated them all, and her granddaughter and a writer were writing a book about their love affair. They open up one of these scrapbooks, and there's an envelope, and inside the envelope is a wishbone, and it's the wishbone from their first Thanksgiving meal, with the names of all the people that came. But at some point, Mrs. Bush, she was quite a shutterbug. She stopped putting the photos in when digital cameras came along. She stopped printing the photos out and put them in a book. And every once in a while, I think Mary Finch, she would call Mary Finch and say, come down to Houston. And Mary would drive down and get the digital photos, but Mrs. Bush would also have all the materials that went. And quite frankly, one of the reasons we decided to redo the museum for the 10th anniversary is because we had all these scrapbooks and there was
that
such she had done, and they had all these great pictures in them. And we said, we're going to mine these for the new.
Max is looking at his watch. You owe us 15 minutes. Okay, Sarah, keep going. We're getting there. We cannot talk about this. We can't do this tonight without talking about the Bush School and how much the Bush School meant to him. And this is Chuck Herman, who was the first head of the Bush School. He would just show up. Sometimes he'd be scheduled to do a lecture, but sometimes he would just drop in the class. I'm not sure which this one is, but the Bush School, he was so proud, and the Bush School meant everything to him. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. This is Mrs. Bush. We actually talked about this today in our meeting. This is one of Mrs. Bush's story times. And I wanted to include these pictures. They did more than just hang out and have fun, and they did some really great events here. She did this every year.
She would do this program for us every year, and this is in our theater, but at some point we started doing it in the 600-seat theater, and then we would have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, and then 50,000 kids watching the program via distance education. And one year, she would answer questions from kids around the country. And one year, a girl in Ghana in West Africa got up, and it's an outdoor school, and somehow they had internet connection, and they asked Mrs. Bush, little girl asked Mrs. Bush a question. They had just met their first lady, and it was just magical. But she did these for us every year.
Every year.
Until she couldn't.
They were big
couldn't
until
do
she
them
couldn't do
anymore.
them anymore. This is President Bush surprised. This is the 10th anniversary of the library. He did not tell anybody that he was going to parachute in, including his wife. He decided to surprise everybody. There he is. At that time, he was doing tandem jumps. I do think George W. was the President of the United States at this time. And I think I heard through the grapevine that he told his Secret Service that in the future he would appreciate a heads up when his father was going to parachute jump. Because the agents were the only one who knew. But look how happy he is. He parachuted up here a couple times. Sarah, let's do the next.
So he hit the ground, and my curator at the time was Patricia Birchfield, who was always collecting clothing. So he hits the ground, and he walks up to Patricia Birchfield, and he starts taking his clothes off. Not really.
To give them to her?
To her. He says,
yeah.
I know you want everything, Patricia. He didn't, but you know. Anyway.
One of the Bush School students over the years, I just saw a couple of them in Houston, one of their great joys in life was to look out the window during class. They weren't paying attention and watching him fish in the lake. And there was a happy day. Fishing in the lake, he would go out there and fish. Another scene that you would see is her walking the dogs, of course. That would be her dog BB. And sometimes he would walk the dogs. There we go. I will tell you one quick story. Max, don't look at your watch. One really quick story that I was thinking about. So, as you know, the Bushes are, of course, buried here, and the media, just like the office of George Bush, you're very organized and very prepared for this when it happens. And the media had decided way ahead of time, the pool cameras, like they knew that NBC was going to do the Rotunda, the Capitol, and ABC would do the National Cathedral, blah, blah, blah. Well, Fox News was going to do the gravesite, which we ended up closing to the press, just so the family could have one thing that was just theirs. But Fox News wanted to come and do their part. They wanted to be ready. Jim McGrath, our press person, called to tell me that he would take Fox News up there. So I don't even know why I told President Bush. I said, sir, just FYI, this is sort of funny. Fox News is coming. He wasn't even in a wheelchair yet. Is coming to advance your burial. He wanted to go lay on top of the gravesite with his arms. He says, Gene, I have the best idea ever. He says, tell McGrath, you coordinate with McGrath, and when they get out there, I'm going to be laying on the ground with my arms crossed over. He did not do it. I said, no. He says, don't you think it'd be funny? And you know what? I should have let him do it.
Well, you know, he had this great fascination with his own funeral.
We'll talk about the funeral in a minute. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I think the next photo, I hope it is what I think it is that this is the last time he brought his friends to College Station. This is the One America Appeal concert right after Hurricane Harvey, which was 5 years ago. And so the two George Bush presidents, the two Texas presidents, were going to do all the work on raising money for Hurricane Harvey relief. By this time, President Bush and President Clinton had done all the disaster work. And we already had an event planned here in October. It was the 20th anniversary of the library. And Larry Gatlin was going to play, and we were going to have a little barbecue tent. It's going to be very easy. And President Bush said to me, Houston had just got hit with 50 inches of rain. And he said, yeah, we're not doing, who cares? It's the 20th anniversary of the library. We need to turn this into a fundraiser for Hurricane Harvey. So without telling him, just as courtesy, I told the other chief of staffs, because the other presidents they all wanted to help with Hurricane Harvey. It ended up being all the former presidents. So I told them, just as an FYI, that this Saturday night in October, the two George Bushes were going to host this event. It would be a little fundraiser, no big deal. Well, President Obama's chief of staff called me first, and she said, he's it. I said, really? And I had not told President Bush I'd sent this email. And she said he would really like to come. It works for him. Then an hour later, I get a call from President Clinton's chief of staff, who was supposed to be in Europe this night, and she said, you really think he's going to let Obama come to Texas and be with the Bush boys without him? He's coming home early. And President Carter's chief of staff had said, just keep me in the loop in case anyone comes. So I called her and I said, so Presidents Clinton and Obama are coming. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm a journalist, so I have to quote accurately. She said, he'll come. So I know we're running out of time, but I tell the Bushes that they're all coming. All the former presidents are coming. And this is such the difference between men and women. Quit looking at your watch. President Bush cried. He was so touched that all of them were, he just couldn't believe it. He cried. He says, they're all coming? I'm like, they are. And Mrs. Bush said, I guess I have to give them dinner. So one more quick story. It was in the Bush's apartment, and it's all these people, Mrs. Bush and Laura Bush came. I don't think any other first ladies came. You know, the Bush's apartment isn't that big. And Secretary Baker called me one day, and he said, I would like to get in on that dinner with the presidents. And I said, well, Mr. Secretary, you need to ask President Bush. He told me to call you. I'm like, oh, thanks a lot. You do not say no to James A. Baker III. And I said, well, of course, sir. And he says, well, can I bring Susan? I'm like, of course. Well, he calls me like a day later. He says, yeah, Dick Cheney wants in on that dinner. Dick Cheney's coming. I said, you may not invite anybody else. He said, okay, he won't bring Lynn. I'm like, okay, no one else can come. He says, Jean, everybody wants to be at this dinner. And okay, go back. Well, yeah, that's okay. Is this your way of Sarah saying we got to get going? Anyway, it was an unbelievable night.
I think so, yeah.
We filled up Reed Arena. I think we raised like 42. I should be embarrassed. Thank you for going back to this photo, Sarah. I should be embarrassed to show this because this is me photobombing a photobomb. When Therese Birch, this is a longtime advance woman, when she found out that all the presidents were coming, she called me and she said, do you need help? And I said, yes, get down here. I need help. And they're waiting in the green room to be introduced. And she said, can I just sneak in the back and get a photo? I said, of course. And then I decided, well, I want part of that action.
Yeah.
What I love about this photo is President Bush used to tell people, this is backstage, we're at Reed Arena. This is backstage at Reed Arena. When people would say to him, why are you friends with Bill Clinton? And in his last couple of years, he would say, look, I'm old. I ran out of things to say. I don't have to worry about that when I'm with Bill. Look who's doing the talking in this photo. They're all listening to him. Yeah. Okay, I know you have a story. So this was the last big event. You tell your story.
All right, so I'll try to be brief. So you can see President Bush is in a wheelchair. We did this exhibit on offshore drilling, and President Bush was a pioneer in the offshore drilling industry. So he's in the apartment. I come to get him. Shell was the sponsor. So the people from Shell are here, Schlumberger, and I go get him, and he's in the apartment. And quite frankly, he didn't seem to be too excited. So we come down. We walk into the exhibit. The man hasn't been in the petroleum business for 30 or more years.
More than that.
More than that,
Oh,
40.
yeah. It would be since the 60s, so.
There are 3 rocks at the opening of the exhibit, big rocks. And President Bush looks at the rocks and he goes, that's striated rock. There's oil in those rocks. And I thought to myself, wow. wow, he hasn't been in this business 40 or plus years, and it was like a light bulb went on, and he was on. And you can see he's just enjoying the heck out of himself in the exhibit. But I think one of the things people underappreciate or didn't realize about President Bush, he was a smart guy. I mean, he was a very, very smart guy. But I was so impressed by, there's oil in those rocks, and I thought, wow. But, he's Phi Beta Kappa, graduated from Harvard, Yale, sorry.
Oh my gosh, oh.
Well, we'll edit that piece out. But was quite intelligent, but all around just both of them just wonderful people.
Except for you, he's the smartest man I knew. Okay, so we'll end with the funeral. Of course, they were buried here. There was never any question about this. It was his idea to have a funeral train. Union Pacific was amazing. And the 4141 engine we'd use for some other events. As all of you now know, it's sitting right over there under bubble wrap, and one day will be part of the library. Neil, do you remember when we passed these cowboys? The family it probably was one of the most special moments on the tour. What I love about this picture is the man who took it told me, I got his permission, I put this in the book, The Man I Knew, and he said there were a lot more horses and cowboys, but the engineer tooted to greet them, and all the other horses ran away. These were the only cowboys that you could, that was one of our favorite moments, don't you think, Neil, along the track?
Well, my memory is, the picture doesn't quite show it, but it was a miserable, rainy day. And I was here and came back from the funeral to College Station to greet the train, and everybody's in a very somber mood. And the Aggie band strikes up the Aggie War thing, and it just, a cheer went up through the crowd, and it was very cathartic, and it was a wonderful day, a wonderful way to greet President Bush in College Station.
In College Station. Bob Gates, who attended the funeral in D.C., of course, as a member of the president's cabinet and the head of his CIA, he then hustled to Texas because he wanted to be here. He's like, got to be part of the Aggie welcome. Bob Gates says that moment was his favorite part of the whole week.
It certainly was.
It was a favorite. So we'll end with this photo. This is the procession down to the gravesite. And we did close this to the media. You see, that's all Bush family. There's a lot of you. And they made the walk down there. I closed it to the media. They needed some time alone, but that was his final journey. And he's happy. They're happy to be here. And this is where he wanted to be for the rest of his life. This was the eternity, I will say.
They love
so
this
on
place.
that note, I think we're supposed to take questions. We're running a little late. We promised Max we would be done by 6:10, but he took 15 minutes to introduce everyone here. I mean, quite frankly, if he didn't introduce you in the beginning, you should be a little hurt. But anyway.
Well, first of all, thank you all very much. So the best part about this, and we're all friends and family here, this is the way the conversations are all the time. This is not an act. This is just Gene and Warren and Max and Gene, and this is pretty consistent.
This is so embarrassing right here, but I don't know what.
The good news is we don't have to edit too much of the video.
Can you edit this thing sticking out?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And we are going to go back and double check. It's kind of like time of possession in football.
Whoa,
about which
I don't
of
think
the
it was
speakers.
close.
Yes, and I think Gene may have won the time of possession.
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't always do this.
That was my goal. Okay, go ahead.
So we don't always do this, but we still have a little bit of time to do Q&A. We have some Bush School ambassadors here who are amazing Bush School students and leaders who are going to help out. All that I ask, even though we all know each other, please identify yourself when you ask your question. So who wants to go first? I'm going to start calling on people if you don't.
If you don't have any questions, we're just going to tell more stories. Actually, we'll end on time. Any questions? Oh, but we told you everything you want to know. I love that.
That's very impressive.
Can I
I
tell
think
one?
you covered everything.
Can I tell one quick funny story?
Wait, oh, hang on. We actually do have a question.
Wait, who is it? Can we reject the person?
We
if
cannot.
We know the person.
He is a, Gene, he is a
It's
very
not Tom
generous.
Frechette, is
no,
it?
it's James Davison.
Oh,
He's
okay.
a very generous trustee.
Oh, you're
He
asking
gets
the
mic.
question? James,
Hey,
I'll
James,
take a
James,
question
hang on one
from you
second,
any
please,
day.
for the microphone.
Wasn't this library supposed to have been somewhere else first, and then we moved it to Texas A&M, and where was it supposed to be first?
Houston desperately wanted this library, and at the end, the University of Houston, and I think Rice and Jim, where is Jim Saccone? He knows this because he's the one who, where are you? You negotiated all this. They wanted to put it in Herman Park, and they really, because it was his hometown. And then Michael Halbudi pulled out those election day results, and what a brilliant move. But President Bush, and it was, it was all about the core, and he loved the spirit of A&M.
So President Bush, no president had ever chose a site for his presidential library as early as President Bush did. He did it in the second year of his administration. No one had ever done it that early. So if it was going to go to Houston or wherever, 2 years into administration, President Bush decided that it was going to go to Texas A&M.
Many times he said this was the right choice, and he was so glad that he.
It was the right choice. It was absolutely the right choice. If there's no more questions,
we see another one.
Wait. Do we want to take a question from Tyson?
No, Tyson's
Okay,
just
Tyson,
helping.
you're on. We trust you.
No, it's
oh,
not.
it's not Tyson.
Linda Harvell.
Howdy, y'all. I think it's not so much a question, but for those of us who were blessed to see the final ride home of President Bush on the train, and how many thousands of people were along the roadside for miles and miles and miles, showed what a tribute that was to President Bush and the Bush family. It was so touching, and it was just the right way to bring him home. And I didn't want y'all to forget about that procession, because it was amazing.
It was amazing.
When Mrs. Bush died, I was standing along the roadside, and their son, George Bush, was in a car, and he passed me, and he looked over at me and smiled and waved. And I was so truly touched. He's going to go bury his mom, but here he sees somebody standing on the road, and he still took the time to just say howdy. And I just wanted to share those little, touching moments, because it was really special, and I just don't want those to be forgotten.
Chuck Herman.
I didn't see Chuck.
I didn't see Chuck. Thank God we put that picture in of him. Okay.
I wonder if Warren could tell us a little bit about gifts to President Bush that are in the library, some of the unusual things that you're hanging on to.
Before I came here, one of my duties during the Bush administration was to go once a week to the executive office building and pick up the gifts and pack them up for eventual deposit in the presidential library. But we've got, President Bush got all kinds of stuff, gold palm trees, everything from gold palm trees in which the dates were made out of pearls. And that's beautiful, but also very simple items. One of my favorite items that's actually on display in the museum is a rock, and it has a street scene of Managua, Nicaragua painted on it. And it's as beautiful to me as the gold palm tree. But he also got domestic gifts. He got gifts from Americans, hats, T-shirts, and then a lot of stuff from the citizens of Kuwait. One of my favorites is a shell casing from a howitzer or something, and it was found in the backyard or the kindergarten playground of these kids, and they took it and decorated it and sent it to the president. I mean, there's some amazing gifts over there.
I think we've got time for one more question if anybody's got one. Great. Yes, ma'am.
We live in Houston, and we're members of St. Martin's Episcopal Church, where the Bushes attended. And the day that the president came back to Houston after losing the second election, he arrived, and then the following day, as I remember, it was Sunday. And here, a few days ago, he was the President of the United States. And on that Sunday, he was in our church activity center around pool tables with paper plates full of brownies and cookies. And he was just so, I know deep down inside he wasn't happy, but he was there with the people that loved him. And it was just an amazing moment to see how our country can pass the baton and still go on.
Thank you for sharing
Thanks
that.
for sharing that, Linda. That's lovely.
So before I ask Jean to join me up here, I just want to thank all of y'all again for being part of this fun evening. I knew Warren and Jean were going to bring the house down, and they certainly did. So thank you all for sharing all these great memories. I also want to thank all of you for what you do to support the Bush Presidential Center. This is the 25th anniversary of the library, but as we've alluded to and discussed before, 2 years from now is the 100th anniversary of President Bush's birth, so his 100th birthday. We're really excited about that. As Jean mentioned, we're going to have a new building in front of the library that's going to have 4141 locomotive and a Marine One helicopter, and we're excited to celebrate with y'all in June of 24. So thank you for all you do. You all now have a responsibility to share this legacy of President Bush with everyone you meet and talk to. Yes, Jean?
It's going to shock you. I have something to say.
Shocking.
Shocking. I thought a lot about that. We had our Bush School Advisory Board meeting today. And as all of you know, I did write a book about my 25 years as his chief of staff, the man I knew. It will be for sale in the lobby after this. Anyway, the book came out a year and a half ago. I have done 9 book events this fall. President Bush's, it is a living legacy. This man has never been more popular. I had lunch with my editor in New York a couple weeks ago, and he wants me to write another book about President Bush. And I said, okay, he did die at the end of the last book. But anyway, the whole reason I bring this up is about this place. This place is a living legacy, and it really hit me today in some of our discussions. His example, his example of leadership and civility, he really left us a blueprint on how to do this. And I'm just so grateful to Max, the foundation, everyone connected to the foundation, Warren and his team. And it's obviously the Bush School, Mark Welsh and his team. This is a living legacy. He maybe is gone, but he's not gone at all. He's still here in all of us and all of you. And if I don't shut up, I'm going to cry. So we have one more picture to share. So President Bush, so the director of the library is going to retire, and he calls me into his office. And of course, you do know that Warren is a federal government employee. His boss is the Archivist of the United States. And they pick who the presidential library directors are. So President Bush called me in his office, and he said, I want Warren Finch to be the director of my library. And I said, sir, unfortunately, that's not your decision. We don't have the hiring power there. And he President Bush, the last thing he was a smart ass. He looked at me and he said, watch me. And I think his next words were, get Saccone on the phone. This was President Bush's hand-chosen person to head his library. He and Mrs. Bush had so much faith and respect for Warren and his wife, Mary. I remember one time, Laura Pears and I are driving to the library, and Mrs. Bush is wanting Mary to come down and get her diaries from her. And I said to her, well, Laura and I can take them. And she said, I don't trust you. I want Mary Finch to come get them. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Anyway, Warren, you have been such an amazing partner. You have been like family. If the office of George Bush was still open, you would not be retiring. I wouldn't. But we have loved working with you. You've been amazing. President Bush as always was right to handpick you, and we're gonna miss you so much. And I said this afternoon, I'm gonna repeat it. When you join Bush World, it's a little bit like Hotel California. You can check in, but you can't check out. And if you don't know what that means, go listen to the song. Yeah, you'll be in our life for a long time to come.
Thank you. Thank you.
And one final round of applause for Gene and Warren for an amazing event. Thank you so much. Wait, I know this is going to surprise you. Gene has something else.
No, I don't.
Oh, I thought you did.
I don't. Well, I'll just say, and I
Oh,
feel
she does have something
no,
else.
I feel awkward saying this, but there was a couple of you who were buying books, and they made me come in here. I don't expect anybody to buy a book, but if you want to go buy a book, I will meet you out there and I'll sign it. And there's like 2 people who I said I'll meet you right after. You're first in line wherever you are. Okay.
Thank you and good night.